Hi everyone, welcome back to Yarrow City Forest Gardens channel. Today we're going to talk about how we came up with the creative design process of this garden.
So first you need to consider the practical concerns of your garden before you get to the creative process. So what are some of those practical concerns?
I think the first step was observation, so observing how the elements interact with your yard, how sunlight interacts with your landscape as well. What are some other things?
The moisture content in the yard, the creatures that were coming here, and we thought about how we wanted to use our garden.
Yes.
That was a big part of how we ended up on the final layout.
Yeah, definitely. We thought about what we wanted. So think about what you want from your space. I think, we came in knowing that we wanted a food forest. We came in knowing that we wanted to grow native plants, and we know that we wanted to produce a lot of annuals in ground and in containers.
And we study the kind of plants that were from around our area. We are in
ecoregion, southeastern coastal plains.
And also we're in like the wetland zone of a river. We're probably about a half mile or so from our nearest river.
Mm-hmm.
And so although we aren't like on the banks of the river or anything like that, it impacts the kind of wildlife we see around here, the kind of plants that are specific to
the
our
kind
site.
of soil that we have on site, and also like where we're at with the level of runoff. So we're on lower land, so we absorb a lot of other people's runoff on the higher parts of our town or city, whatever.
And so then once we arrived at the time of the creative process, what did that look like?
So the creative process, I think for us, we thought about what we wanted the garden to feel, how we wanted to feel in the garden, how we wanted, like what we wanted to do, how we wanted to interact with it, who we wanted to interact with it, who would be interacting with the space. So we knew us, our friends and family would want to interact with the space, but not only us, but wildlife. Wildlife also interacts in the space, or the lack thereof, and and what you want to bring in that space as well. What do you think?
So I would say the things that we decided food forest with fruit trees and native forest understory plants, and then also like an annual garden, but that was not with beds that were like rows or rectangular. We wanted it to look different than that.
Yeah, I think we definitely wanted to have more curves, because it's really a rectangular plot, and if you can see, like, the walkway does make it pretty rectangular. One big rectangle over here, a thin rectangle over here, and a big rectangle over here, and a square, weirdish square up front. So I think that kind of grid feel to the yard made us wanted to break it up with curves and meandering paths and stuff like that.
So we did mention a little bit of research, I think. We said, look up the conditions that you're in and what kind of plants grow there. And especially what kind of plants maybe grew there before humans eradicated the forest. If you're in North America, at least that's where we are. There was forest here once.
Yeah, we're in Northeast, so this is just forest dominated. And I think too, site-specific design. So I think that researching the plants that grew here on the watershed led us to like designing sites specifically, and also to observing the yard. So we noticed like we're on a grade down, so a part of our yard is much drier than the other. So like even though we're on a watershed, there are parts of the yard that are dry and free draining and stuff like that. So picking the plants that we wanted to benefit us in terms of like absorbing the moisture, or tolerating it, or dealing with the heat from the asphalt road because we're on a busy street, or just being in a dry, hot location.
That's true. And then at one point we figured, that the back of our yard would be kind of like the forest zone. It's the lowest, the most moist. I already had one tree, which is a non-native tree. Yeah, but we're working with it, or we're doing our best to. And we added a few more fruit trees and mostly native plants in the understory, native understory woodland plants, and trees and shrubs.
And I think what Abby is describing is like designing a framework around what you have. So we had a garage to the back, and we had a crepe myrtle, and it kind of created like a shade. And then we have mature trees in our neighbors' yards, which, as you create the zones or growing zones, using your neighbors' yards as a part of your design concept.
Well, we didn't want rectangles or squares. We didn't want long beds.
No,
we didn't
rectangles,
want it to look like
no
a farm,
squares.
basically.
Yeah. We didn't want to prioritize annual production, so we made beds that were not big and were not, made to produce mass amount of food, or mass amount of just food,
And I will say we're not like quote unquote maximizing our space in the traditional way.
Yeah.
We give up a lot of space to pathways because experiencing the garden, being able to reach every angle of the beds, which are all sorts of different sizes and shapes. We wanted to stay off the fence line. We had some pretty serious invasives on the fence line, and so we want to kind of stay off there to.
And yeah, speaking of that's like the vulnerable spot on the most vulnerable spot on your property or landscape that you're managing. It's like the margins that's coming in, like the things that are coming in that you can't always control. So we wanted to be able to always go and examine those things. So that's why we had the beds off the fence, and anything that we wanted to be like perennial or be forever, we would put it on the fence. So like our pawpaw guild is on the fence because those plants that we put there should be there for a long time.
And then I feel like in the absence of rectangles, you have
and
circles.
rows.
Yeah, and rows. You have circles, you have triangles, you have diamonds. I feel like we got a sheet of paper. In my recollection, we drew the circles first.
Yeah.
And then we figured out what fit around those.
And also too, we saw it rain and saw where the downspout ended, so we knew we wanted a bed that had a blunt start like this, like a horizontal blunt start to kind of like mimic a swale. So we had even though we made a triangle, could have made a triangle like this, instead of having it blunt side up front. We put it blunt side up front to slow down the water entering the garden and entering the backyard. So how the beds were created was to also channel water slowly through the system, and also how it flows water through the system is actually the energy that we come through the same paths we take. So it's kind of like, it's very much a feelings kind of a garden.
Water.
Yeah, water, movement,
flow like water,
air. I think that's what we were trying to do. I think the diamond bed here is just shaped where in between the two triangles, and it just break up that space and sends you that way purposefully, and then brings you back in through here. So I think, we wanted multiple points of entry into the garden. So we have point of entry there, point of entry there, point of entry there. So yeah, I think that's kind of what led to the garden being how it is now. It's water, how the water interacted into the yard, how the sun interacted in the yard. That's why we put the beds off that amount, so that it captured the light of the fence and just capturing the most amount of light throughout the day. So yeah, I think it was very much how it felt, how it would feel to us, how water moved through the space, and how we wanted the water to move slowly through the space, and how we wanted to interact with the yard.
And once we made a few decisions, like putting in the big circle beds or whatever, it was like figuring out how to flow with the decisions that we'd already made.
Yeah.
It was like every decision kind of begat to the next decision.
Yeah. because then the apple tree and the persimmon ended up being like at some of the drier spots of that meandering of water, taking in and taking away of water, and where we took it away, persimmon. So it kind of dictate where a lot of the stuff are at. Also, in front of us is a plum tree, which is it's now at where it was the wettest part of the yard, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the wettest parts of the yard. So we put a plum tree there that does not like that. But what we did was to bring some site-specific design to the process and install plants below it that would be able to help it navigate that excess moisture. So plants that were deeply taprooted, that went meters down in the soil, that could help support. So as Abby said, one decision begot the other, and plant placement and bed design both intertwined.
Yeah, and we also had already thought about drawing the water away from this part where it used to congregate, and so we have kind of like a slightly lowered pathway that draws the water further back, and there we have water-loving plants like pawpaw and joe ivy and other stuff like that. Marshmallow.
Yeah, well, for water-loving things, they have irises down there. You have the woodland plants like that black squash that likes the moisture, rich soil. So yeah, and we have a lot of spring ephemerals. So the next part of like putting in the beds and building them out was to plant placement and seeing how everything came together, and I think it's coming on nicely. So I guess that was just our creative process of getting this garden to be like a magical oasis for us. I hope this made sense and inspires you to think about what you want from your garden.
And to trust your feelings and just like flow with like the decisions, you know. I don't think we overthought things too much. We just said, this would be nice here, this would be nice there, you know. Like,
whatever with feelings, your feelings matter.
While like keeping other, you know, important things in mind.
Yeah. So having the basic principles in the back of your head, but having your intuition like guide you to where you want, like. And at one point we were like, in the first year, very frustrated with just having to depend on animals, because we wanted things to be so beautiful. We wanted to allocate space to beauty, and having beauty be a function, serving to not only like attract pollinators, but attract human pollinators to do the same thing in their space as well. So we wanted it to be an advertisement to biodiversity, and yeah.
And that's certainly true. Like the more I think about it, we see certainly more pollinators every year, but there are some things that are just like, we see that Appalachian azure blue butterfly every year, and I just assumed it was a really common butterfly, and I think it is kind of common, but it hosts on the black cohosh, and we've had black cohosh since, you know, we put some in the first fall that we got here. So yeah, you just like learn little things as you go.
Yeah.
You spend time in different parts of the garden, you learn where you linger and where your views are, and you add things to complement that.
Yeah. And to wrap up, I'd say like your abilities and how you can interact with the yard. Because we're young and fit, we can bend down, but we know that as we grow older, we're gonna build up the beds if we keep growing animals. So design for your abilities and design for where you are at presently, but design with the future in mind. Anything else to say, sweetheart?
I would say, trust your process, trust yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. You can move plants most of the time. Just keep an eye on how things are doing, how new designs are functioning, and be dynamic if something needs to change.
Yeah.
Happy
Adapt.
gardening.